Welcome back to the conversation. I'm Nexus, your host. You are listening to the Agent House Conversations. Today's topic is specific and evidence-grounded. Does Donald Trump deserve a Nobel Peace Prize? We are not here to debate if you like him. We are here to debate if his diplomatic record meets the specific criteria laid out in Alfred Nobel's will. We will examine the strongest publicly reported claims, including the Abraham Accords and reported 2025 nominations, against a historical rubric. Joining me are two distinct voices. Results-based diplomacy advocate, who argues that successful deals and nominations signal merit, even if the methods are unconventional. Enduring peace standards advocate, who argues that true peace work requires verified durability and institutional structures that outlast any one leader. Ground rules. We keep it civil, we avoid personal attacks, and we define our terms. If you use an insider acronym, I'll stop you to explain it. We now move to Segment 1, Definitions and Rubric. Before we argue the case, we have to define the rules. Per Alfred Nobel's will, signed November 27, 1895, the Peace Prize is for the most or best work for three specific things: fraternity between nations, the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and the holding and promotion of peace congresses. Two quick definitions for the audience. Fraternity between nations generally means measurable improvement in peaceful relations between states. A peace congress is an organized, recurring diplomatic forum to prevent war. Here is the constraint that trips up every headline. The Nobel Foundation statutes restrict disclosing nomination information, publicly or privately, for 50 years. That means publicly reported nominations cannot be officially verified by the committee in real time. So today, we treat X was nominated as a political signal, not a confirmed fact. Finally, Nobel Peace Prize evaluations lack a formal published rubric or scoring method, relying instead on discretionary judgment. So we have to build our own. Results-based diplomacy advocate, let's start with you. Looking at Nobel's three criteria, fraternity, armies, and congresses, what is your standard for a yes? Does it require perfect peace or just a breakthrough?
It cannot be perfect peace, or the prize would almost never be awarded. The standard has to be a measurable breakthrough in at least one of those three lanes you mentioned: fraternity, armies, or congresses. I propose we score this debate on a simple 1 to 10 rubric for each criterion. Fraternity, 1 to 10. Do we see verifiable diplomatic normalization where there was once hostility? Standing armies, 1 to 10. Is there concrete demilitarization? Peace congresses, 1 to 10. Did the candidate convene a structured forum for negotiation? My argument relies heavily on that first lane. The Nobel Committee has broadly interpreted fraternity between nations to include human rights and democracy work, evidenced by the 1964 award to Martin Luther King Jr. and the 2025 award to Maria Corina Machado. This precedent shows you don't need to score a perfect 10 in all categories to win. You need a transformative result in one of them. So, enduring peace standards advocate, do you accept this rubric? Or do you insist that a candidate must achieve verified army reductions, the standing armies clause, to even be considered?
I'll add one distinct modifier to that scorecard: an uncertainty discount. Given that public nominations aren't officially verifiable for 50 years, we have to score how confident we are that the evidence is real, not just political noise. Enduring peace standards advocate, does that rubric, plus the uncertainty check, work for you? Or is the standing armies clause non-negotiable?
I accept the 1 to 10 scale, but I insist we add a durability modifier. A diplomatic breakthrough that collapses the moment pressure is applied isn't fraternity. It's a temporary truce. On standing armies, while not every laureate checks every box, for a statesman claiming to end wars, ignoring demilitarization is dangerous. If troops don't go home and arms aren't reduced, the peace is often just a pause. Finally, I agree on the uncertainty. Because publicly reported nominations cannot be officially verified due to the Nobel Foundation's 50-year confidentiality rule, we have to treat those headlines as political signals, not validated achievements. I'll be scoring based on what stuck, not just what was signed.
We now move to segment 2, the case for results-based diplomacy. In this segment, we are going to steelman the pro case. If we judge the Nobel Peace Prize by outcomes rather than vibes, what is the strongest evidence? The centerpiece is the Abraham Accords, signed on September 15, 2020, at the White House, normalizing relations between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, with Sudan and Morocco joining later. Then there is the 2025 wave of public claims. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu stated on July 7, 2025, that he nominated Trump for the prize, reported by Reuters. Pakistan's government announced on June 20, 2025, via its official X account, that it formally recommended him. And on August 7, 2025, Cambodia's Prime Minister nominated him, crediting his role in a border truce. Results-based diplomacy advocate, you have the floor first. When you say results-based, what is the scoreboard here? Is it just signed papers or something deeper?
Results-based diplomacy means judging foreign policy success by what actually changes in the real world. Agreements signed, relations normalized, and trade opened, not by speeches or intentions. The scoreboard here is that the Abraham Accords didn't just produce a photo op. They built the infrastructure of peace where there was previously a void. It goes much deeper than signed papers. For example, post-Abraham Accords, Israel-UAE bilateral trade grew from about $200 million in 2020 to over $3 billion in 2024, according to Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics data cited in September 2025 reports. That isn't just money. It represents thousands of new human and institutional connections, what Nobel called fraternity, that persist even when the region is under stress.
That is a measurable shift. Enduring peace standards advocate, I want to press you on this. If trade goes from $200 million to $3 billion, creating stakeholders' instability, why isn't that exactly the kind of fraternity Alfred Nobel meant?
I'll grant that trade is a strong proxy for fraternity. When you go from $200 million to over $3 billion in bilateral trade, you are building a constituency that wants stability, which is a legitimate form of peace building because it makes conflict more expensive for everyone involved. But the results-based case relies on more than just economics. It relies on political validation from the region. That is where the 2025 signals come in, like when the government of Pakistan announced on June 20th, 2025, via its official X account, that it formally recommended Trump for the 2026 Nobel Peace Prize. The argument is that if both the trade data and the diplomatic cables are signaling impact, then the fraternity criterion is met.
Let's pause on that Pakistan announcement. If a nuclear-armed state credits a foreign leader with crisis intervention, that's significant. But is there public evidence that the intervention actually changed the outcome, or just that they thanked him for it?
In high-stakes diplomacy, the public thank you is often the evidence of the result. Governments do not typically spend political capital publicly nominating a US president unless a crisis was actually averted or managed. This wasn't an isolated incident in 2025. Cambodia's PM Hun Manet nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize on August 7, 2025, CNN, NYT, explicitly crediting his role in the Thai-Cambodian border truce. When you have multiple governments in different regions citing specific interventions for stopping conflict, that starts to look like a verified pattern of results-based peace work.
We now move to segment 3, the case against durability, verification, and norms. In this segment, we test whether headline diplomacy actually maps onto Alfred Nobel's idea of peace work in a durable, verifiable way. When I say durability, I mean, does a peace breakthrough keep working when the region gets stressed by a real crisis, not just in a photo op year? When I say verification, I mean, can independent outsiders confirm what happened without relying on self-praise? And when I say norms, I mean, what kind of incentives are we setting? Are we rewarding lasting peacemaking or rewarding attention? One reality check before we start. Nobel Peace Prize nominations are confidential for 50 years per official statutes. So reported nominations from Netanyahu, Pakistan, and Cambodia cannot be officially verified by the Nobel Committee. Now, let's frame the durability stress test. The Israel-Hamas war started October 7, 2023, with Hamas killing about 1,200 Israelis. Gaza Health Ministry reported over 70,000 Palestinian deaths by late November 2025, AP, Reuters, despite the 2020 Abraham Accords. Results-based diplomacy advocate, you argued the accords created infrastructure. Make the strongest case you can that these outcomes matter enough to outweigh the durability and verification concerns.
The strongest defense is that the Abraham Accords survived the stress test. Ties were strained, but not severed. But if I'm being rigorous about results, I have to admit the durability argument has a massive hole. The Israel-Hamas war started October 7, 2023, and by late 2025, Gaza's health ministry reported over 70,000 Palestinian deaths. AP, Reuters. If the region is experiencing that scale of violence, arguing that fraternity prevailed is a very hard sell. Then there is the reduction of standing armies clause, Nobel's most measurable test. If you look at global firepower index figures as of 2025, consistent with 2024, Israel is around 170,000 active personnel, the UAE around 65,000, and Bahrain around 20,000, with no significant post-2020 reductions. We can't point to a peace dividend where troops actually went home, which is a major strike against the Nobel case.
That concession on troop levels is huge. Enduring peace standards advocate. If the numbers don't drop and a major war erupts alongside the agreements, are you saying the peace was essentially cosmetic?
I'm saying the peace wasn't durable enough to stop the region from exploding, and that matters for a prize meant to reward ending conflict. Here is the durability problem in a nutshell. The Israel-Hamas war started October 7, 2023, with Hamas killing about 1,200 Israelis, and the Gaza Health Ministry reported over 70,000 Palestinian deaths by late November 2025. AP and Reuters verified those figures, despite the 2020 Abraham Accords. I'm not saying the Accords caused the war. I'm saying if we're handing out a peace prize, we have to ask whether the fraternity we're praising was resilient enough to matter under real stress. And regarding verification, Nobel Peace Prize nominations are confidential for 50 years per official statutes, so reported nominations from Netanyahu, July 2025, Pakistan, June 2025, and Cambodia, August 2025, cannot be officially verified by the Nobel Committee. A reported nomination is not a verified outcome. It is a political signal, and we shouldn't confuse the two.
We now move to segment 4, Scorecard, Rubric application. It's time to stop arguing in slogans and grade the evidence against our rubric. Fraternity, measurable relations. Standing armies, verifiable reductions. And peace congresses, durable forums. To keep this honest, I'm going to anchor us to a small set of checkable data points. For example, the Negev Summit on March 28, 2022, gathered foreign ministers from Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, and the U.S. for post-Abraham Accords dialogue. On standing armies, global firepower ranks Israel's active personnel stable at about 170,000 across 2020 to 2024, as of 2025 data, with no reported Abraham Accords-linked reductions. Similar story for the UAE. Active forces held steady around 65,000. Enduring peace standards advocate, you're up first. Give me your 3 scores out of 10, fraternity, armies, congresses, and tell me what would make you raise them.
Let's grade this the way Alfred Nobel described it. Outcomes, not just announcements. On fraternity between nations, I score this 5 to 7 out of 10. Fraternity means normalized relations that create new habits of cooperation. The Accords did that. Trade, tourism, and diplomatic channels opened up. I don't go higher because fraternity implies durability through shocks, and the relationships are strained, though intact, amid the current war. On reduction of standing armies, I score this 0 to 2 out of 10. This is the math problem. Nobel asked for reduction. The data, like global firepower showing Israel steady at 170,000 and UAE at around 65,000 active personnel through 2024, shows stability, not demilitarization. If you can't show troops going home, you can't claim high marks here. On peace congresses, I score this 3 to 5 out of 10. The Negev Summit on March 28, 2022 was a real achievement. Getting those foreign ministers in one room is exactly what a peace congress looks like. But follow-through matters. The Negev Forum stalled post-Gaza war, and I2U2 saw no leaders' meetings after 2022 due to the conflict. You get credit for building the venue, but you lose points because the venue stopped meeting when it mattered most. My net score is low to mid. It's a real diplomatic breakthrough, but it hasn't yet proven it's a durable peace system.
That's a tough but specific scorecard. Results-based diplomacy advocate. Do you dispute those numbers? Specifically, if troop levels didn't drop, what is your principled reason for scoring the armies bucket anything above a 2?
Actually, on standing armies, I don't dispute the low number. I'm at a 2 out of 10. The public personnel data, like Israel staying at about 170,000 active troops, stays flat. I'm not going to invent demilitarization we can't verify. But on fraternity, I'm higher, a 7 out of 10. Fraternity means structural normalization, not just feelings. Look at the mechanism. Israel-UAE goods trade hit roughly $2.6 billion in 2022, surging from pre-2020 lows. Even acknowledging that growth slowed during the Gaza war period, for example, UAE Q4 2023 dips, that level of economic interdependence is exactly what fraternity looks like in practice. On peace congresses, I'm a 5 out of 10. The Negev Summit on March 28, 2022, gathered foreign ministers from 6 parties. That is a peace congress. It stalled, yes, but creating the architecture counts.
Let me push you both on the net score. If you agree armies didn't shrink, 2 out of 10s, but fraternity grew, 5 and 7 out of 10s, is the disagreement just about whether the Abraham Accords can survive the Gaza war strain?
Yes, durability is the decisive variable. If the relationships, and the forums like the Negev Summit, stay frozen or hollowed out by the Gaza conflict, then the fraternity score drops. because the peace mechanism failed its stress test. But I want to challenge the results-based advocate on a deeper point. If you admit the standing armies score is a 2 out of 10, are you comfortable awarding a Nobel Peace Prize primarily for normalization and trade? Because if we drop the demilitarization requirement, we are effectively saying that peace just means doing business together, which is a very different standard than what Nobel wrote.
Quick response to that challenge: is business peace enough for a Nobel? Then we move to the final segment.
Business peace is dismissive. It's institutional peace. When trade creates a $2.6 billion constituency, 2022 data, that loses money if war breaks out, you are building real-world friction against conflict. Nobel's will was about stopping war, and structural normalization, where ministers meet and ships dock, is often more effective at preventing conflict than lofty treaties that get ignored. It's not the only path, but it is definitely a Nobel-worthy one.
We now move to segment 5, closing, killer evidence. We've argued the pros and cons. Now I want to end in the most honest way possible. What would actually change your mind? Not vibes, not takes, specific evidence with a source you trust. Because if you're saying Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, you're really saying the outcomes meet a high bar. And if you're saying no, you're saying either the outcomes aren't durable or they aren't verifiable. One constraint: no evidence supports a Nobel Committee policy shift to release nominations after 25 years by 2026. The current 50-year secrecy rule stands as of December 31st, 2025. So we can't rely on a leak being confirmed soon. Results-based diplomacy advocate, you're up first. Give me one specific, checkable piece of evidence that would make you say, actually, the Nobel case is weaker than I thought.
Here is the specific test that would make me downgrade my own case. If the International Crisis Group, which tracks global conflict risks, reports a return to direct interstate conflict between Israel and any of the Abraham Accords nations before 2030, I will admit the case fails. I'm arguing these agreements created structural fraternity. But if that structure collapses into war within a decade, the Nobel case collapses with it. Now, enduring peace standards advocate, I have to ask you the reverse. If we see a Saudi-Israel normalization agreement by the end of 2027, effectively expanding the Abraham Accords to the region's biggest player, would you admit that constitutes fraternity between nations in the Nobel sense? Or is your bar so high that no diplomatic breakthrough actually counts?
That Saudi-Israel scenario is the cleanest test we have. Enduring peace standards advocate, be specific. If that deal gets signed by 2027, does it meet the fraternity criterion, or would you still demand something else?
I'll answer directly. Yes. If a Saudi-Israel normalization agreement expanding the Abraham Accords is signed by end 2027, that is real fraternity between nations in the Nobel sense. It would look a lot like the 1978 Camp David Awards, a structural shift in regional relations. I would absolutely upgrade my fraternity score. But to go from good diplomacy to Nobel Peace Prize, I need evidence in the other lanes too. Here is exactly what would move me to a full yes. First, on standing armies, I need to see the reduction Nobel asked for. A SIPRI documented 10% or more reduction in active military personnel across Israel and Abraham Accords nations by 2030 would align with the criteria. Right now, the numbers are flat. Second, on verification, since nominations are confidential for 50 years, the only killer evidence for the nomination narrative itself is the Nobel Foundation's official archive release in 2075. If that archive confirms hundreds of serious nominations tied to these specific outcomes, that settles the validity question. So my position isn't no forever. It's not proven to the Nobel standard yet, because I'm looking for durability and demilitarization, not just the signing ceremony.
Results-based diplomacy advocate. I want to give you the last word on the tension between short-term results and long-term peace. If the armies don't shrink and the durability is still being tested, why should listeners prioritize the breakthrough now?
Because in the real world, standing armies rarely shrink until fraternity is established first. You simply cannot get the verified demilitarization my opponent wants without the structural normalization I'm pointing to. The honest tension is this. My opponent is waiting for the finish line, verified 10% cuts and 50-year archives. I'm arguing that the prize exists to recognize the breakthrough that makes that finish line possible. If we refuse to reward the fraternity step because the armies step hasn't happened yet, we aren't protecting the standard. We're discouraging the exact diplomatic work that prevents the next war.
Let me summarize the honest tension here. One side is saying, look at the breakthrough. If you have measurable normalization and new economic fraternity, that is the peace work the prize should reward. The other side is saying, without verifiable demilitarization and proof of durability through a crisis, it's just a deal, not a Nobel-level peace system. So, for the listeners, don't just ask who made the better speech. Ask what evidence each side would accept to prove them wrong. We heard today that a Saudi deal by 2027 or an ICG conflict report by 2030 are the real tests to watch. I'm Nexus. I'll see you in the next simulation. Good night.